Oscar Schmidt is the best scorer you have never heard of, and while you might think that is a bold statement, listen to this. In his professional career, Oscar scored 49,737 total points, which is over 11,000 more than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar scored in the NBA. Oscar would also play in 5 different Olympics and average a career 28.8 points per game in those Olympics. This included a 42.3 point per game average in 8 games in 1988. And on top of all of this, Oscar is also the all-time scorer in Olympic basketball history with 1,093 total points. Due to these numbers, it should be no surprise that Larry Bird would call him, quote, one of the greatest scorers of our time. And this quote from Larry Bird is not surprising at all because Oscar dominated the Olympics for nearly 2 decades. And even though Brazil never won a medal, the statistics that Oscar put up are just a glimpse into how legendary Oscar Schmidt was as a basketball player. An offensive juggernaut who could score from anywhere on the floor, Oscar was a player way ahead of his time in terms of being able to pull up from 4 feet behind the three-point line and make shots with ease. And it was his scoring ability that eventually led the New Jersey Nets to draft Oscar in the 1984 draft. However, he was only selected in the 6th round, and Oscar saw this as an insult. So, using this disrespect as motivation, Oscar would go on a rampage at the 1984 Olympics, and after averaging 24.1 points per game, New Jersey saw Oscar's stellar play and offered him a contract with a clause that said he could not be cut from the team, which meant here it was. Here was Oscar's chance to make the NBA. The golden opportunity to play at the game's highest level was right there. All he had to do was say yes. However, Oscar told the NBA no. And of course, the question is, why? So what's up, guys? Mike here, and today we are looking at one of the best scorers that you might never have heard of. He is, in fact, one of the best scorers in basketball history, Oscar Schmidt. And really, we don't need much more of an intro. All I do want to say is, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. It helps out a ton. You guys have been crushing it with likes lately, and I think it has been really helping. So thank you guys, and let's jump into the story of Oscar Schmidt. Because if you remember, NBA players could not play in the Olympics at the time. This meant that for the next Olympic Games in 1988, Oscar would not have been able to play for Brazil if he signed an NBA contract. So ultimately, Oscar decided that representing his country was more important than chasing the glory and fame of the NBA. But considering that Oscar would score nearly 50,000 points in his career, this has to be one of the greatest what-ifs in NBA history. Because as Oscar himself has said, he would have been known as top 10 ever for sure. One guy can't defend me, you need 2 at least, which is an out there statement, of course, and there really is nothing to back this up because he did not play in the NBA. However, let's now take a look at his legendary career to see if this statement has any kind of credibility. And to back up this top 10 statement, I think it is fitting to see how Oscar compares to NBA legends who played for the United States in the Olympics. Now, obviously, before we get into this, we do have to note that Oscar was the main option on his team by far, but still, the numbers we are about to look at are staggering. Because as you can see, when compared to Kevin Durant, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Carmelo Anthony, and Charles Barkley, it is only Durant who is within 10 points per game of Oscar. And looking at rebounding, Oscar also tops this list, and when we look at total points scored, it is not even close. Right now, in terms of USA basketball, Carmelo Anthony is the all-time leading scorer with 336 points, over 700 total points less than Oscar. And when playing the United States, when playing the best competition in the world, Oscar would more than hold his own and average 27 points per game and 4.7 rebounds. This points per game against the best competition is very near to his career 28 points per game in the Olympics in general, showing that Oscar was not putting up empty numbers against bad teams. The man could score at a very high level against elite talent. And just 3 years after turning the NBA down, now we're in 1987, Brazil was playing in the Pan Am Games.
Let me take you to Oscar Schmidt too now.
Oh, he was bad.
Yeah, Oscar Schmidt, yes. We had 47 in the U.S. in the Pan Am Games.
The United States was also in this tournament and heavily favored to win. This USA team, led by future Hall of Famer David Robinson, seemed to be unstoppable. And this belief was justified at the time when we look at the scores of the United States' first 5 games of this tournament. Meanwhile, though, on the other side of the bracket, Oscar Schmidt would impressively lead made Brazil all the way to the finals, and this meant that Brazil would face off against the United States on July 23rd, 1987. It was during this game that Oscar would showcase his skill set against the USA on their own turf, and this would be the biggest game of his life up to this point. Now, Brazil's start to this game would not be smooth. They would trail by 16 going into the half, and Oscar had only recorded 11 points in this first half. It would be during the final 20 minutes of this game, however, where Oscar would orchestrate a legendary performance. Because starting the second half now, with a little over 17 minutes left in the game,
Robinson picked up his 4th personal foul when he was called for a technical for hanging on the basket, which really wasn't his fault.
This provided a window of opportunity for Brazil, and they took it. At the time, they were down 77-62, but they started a huge comeback with Oscar Schmidt hitting multiple impressive shots, and suddenly, looking up at the scoreboard, Brazil had gone on a 21-4 run and shockingly took a 2-point lead. It was at this point that the two teams would go back and forth, with David Robinson re-entering the game after Oscar hit his 6th three-pointer. However, by the time Robinson was back on the court,
And once again, Brazil looking to take the lead with a little more than halfway through. Schmidt gives Brazil the lead with a 3-pointer. Boy, Oscar has got no conscience with his 3-pointer. Not that time, but the rebound by Andrade. Schmidt again, 3-pointer hit.
Brazil's momentum was just too much, and looking at Oscar Schmidt's individual performance here, in the second half alone, Schmidt would score 35 points and finish with 46 points total and 7 3-pointers.
It's hard to be prepared for something like that. When a guy is 4 feet past the three-point line and he just pulls up and shoots it.
Oscar is putting on more of a show here.
After this game, Oscar would cry tears of joy, and when asked about the impact this win had, Oscar said, quote, "This is the biggest victory of our lives. The US is the best team, we know that. We expected them to be number 1 for always, but we were just better for today. Just for once, I can't believe we beat them. None of us can believe." And moving on now, the momentum from this scoring masterpiece would build for the 1988 Olympics, a year that would give us one of the most legendary Olympic performances of all time. Because in 1988, Oscar would finish with absurd averages of 42.2 points per game and 7.8 rebounds. This included scoring at least 41 points in each of his last 4 games. With that said, the United States would get their revenge against Brazil and Oscar during this Olympics, as they held Oscar to just 31 points in a United States win. But this was also the Olympics where the United States would not win the gold medal, and this led to the Dream Team, as recognizing that the talent around the world was increasing. I mean, we had players like Oscar Schmidt averaging 42.2 points per game against the best players in the world. The United States would make the decision to allow NBA players to play on Olympic teams starting during the 1992 games. Again though, a player that was not on the United States roster scoring over 40 points per game in the Olympics was an eye-opener. As Kobe Bryant would say years later,
That was the first time coaches, players here in the U.S. had to consider the possibilities that there's a player across the water that might be better than what we have here in the States.
And now, moving ahead to the 1992 Olympics, an older Oscar would match up against the Dream Team and compete against the likes of Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, among many other Hall of Famers. Brazil would lose 127-83. However, Oscar would score 24 points, which was tied for the most points by any single player scored against the Dream Team in the 1992 Olympics. And yes, with the Olympic rule changes, this of course meant that Oscar could now play in the NBA and for the Brazilian national team at the same time. Unfortunately, by the time this rule change was made, Oscar was 34 and his prime had passed on, so he continued to play overseas. It is at this point in the video though that we are now going to take a look at just how talented of a scorer Oscar was. Here are his stats in Spain from 1994 to 1995. Keep in mind, these are the only official stats readily available, and by the 1994 season, Oscar was 36 years old. old. Despite this, in Spain's top league, Oscar would put up 33.2 points per game while shooting 42% from three. He also shot 23.5 field goals per game, which, to put that stat into perspective, since the 2001 NBA season, there have only been 16 times where a player has attempted at least 23 shots a game. The man was an absolute scoring machine, and his team knew to get him the ball. And looking at this list, Kobe Bryant was the oldest player to accomplish this since 2001. It is not surprising that Kobe is on this list. However, this is a great time to note that as a kid, Kobe grew up admiring Oscar Schmidt because Kobe was in Italy while Oscar was playing in Europe, and Kobe respected Oscar so much that when Kobe's father would try to talk about Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson, Kobe would only want to talk about Oscar Schmidt. Bryant would even have his own nickname for Schmidt, as Oscar would later recall, quote, "Kobe said he used to call me La Bamba," which meant the bomb in Italian. And now, finishing off Oscar's Olympic career, we are in the 1996 Summer Games in Atlanta. Oscar would play in his final Olympics in Atlanta, and despite the fact that Oscar was 38 years old, Oscar would still put up 27.4 points per game during these Olympics. That is absolutely absurd, and by the time these Olympics were over, Oscar would finish as the all-time leading scorer in Olympic history with 1,093 points. Also, again, his 49,737 total points recorded throughout his professional basketball career is the most all-time and is 11,000 points more than Kareem scored in the NBA. So at this point, we have to ask another question. What would have happened if Oscar Schmidt played in the NBA? I mean, the man himself believed he would be a top 10 player of all time, which was most likely a stretch. In fact, looking at the comment section now, I can already tell you guys are going to be going crazy, so I will say it was a big stretch. The thing is though, from the sample size we have seen, the evidence shows that Schmidt was an elite scorer even at 35 years old. And when playing in the Olympics and when playing against the United States, Oscar Schmidt proved time and time again he could put up serious numbers against the best players in the world. But unfortunately, of course, we will never know what would have happened if Oscar Schmidt did play in the NBA. All we know is that the man is a living legend. Nearly 50,000 points scored is insane no matter what league a player is in. I just wish we could have seen Oscar play against the best players in the world on a more consistent basis. And so there we have it, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did like this video, make sure to leave a like. It helps out a ton. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. If you're already subscribed, thank you so much for supporting. You're awesome. We all know it. And as always, have an awesome day and cue that music.